My name is Avery Collins, and I was 17 the day my leg shattered in front of hundreds of people. It happened during the Georgia State Track Championship, the biggest meet of my high school career, the one I'd trained for obsessively since junior year. The sky was clear, the crowd was loud, and the scouts were there. All of it was supposed to align perfectly. I wasn't just racing for a medal, I was racing for a full-ride scholarship, my future, my freedom. I remember the exact second it snapped. One stride too far, one push too hard off the block, and then crack, like a dry branch under a boot. The pain shot through my thigh like a lightning bolt, and I collapsed mid-sprint screaming before I even hit the ground. I didn't black out. I wish I had. Instead, I remember everything. The silence that fell over the crowd, the panicked footsteps, the medics shouting over each other, the sharp sting of morphine that came too late. My leg was broken clean, a full femur fracture. They said later you could hear it from the bleachers. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and tears. My fingers were cold, my teeth wouldn't stop chattering, but all I could think was, where are Mom and Dad? They were supposed to be in the stands, front row. They'd promised. Of course we'll be there, my mom had said that morning, kissing my forehead. This is your big day, kiddo, Dad added with a grin. We wouldn't miss it for the world. Apparently the world had other plans. At the ER, I kept asking for them. Have my parents checked in yet? Can someone call them again? Can I borrow a phone? Maybe they got lost. A nurse named Kelsey held my hand as they wheeled me in for imaging. I don't know why she stayed, but I'm glad she did. She talked to me while they prepped me for surgery, even when I was drifting in and out under anesthesia. She combed my hair back gently and said, "You're going to be okay, Avery. You're not alone." But I was. When I woke up fully groggy and in a hospital room with a metal rod in my leg and a cast up to my hip, all I had was a voicemail. Not a visit, not even a FaceTime, just a voicemail. "Hey, honey?" My mom's voice chirped, chipper and breathless. "We're not going to make it to the hospital. Savannah's orientation at Duke got moved up and, well, she's nervous and this is a big deal for her. I'm sure you'll be fine. You've always been strong. Love you." That was it. No, how bad is it? No, we're on our way. Not even a picture of our dog to cheer me up. Just my mom's voice choosing Savannah's college orientation over my broken femur. Over me. I lay there in stunned silence. For a while I thought maybe it was a joke. Maybe they'd walk in any second with flowers and apologies, and Savannah rolling her eyes annoyed to be at a hospital on her big day. But no one came. Kelsey checked on me again. She was the only one who did. And that's when the real fracture happened, not in my leg, but somewhere deeper. Something cracked inside me, something you can't see on an X-ray. It was the moment I realized in my family being strong meant being forgotten. I stared at the ceiling for hours that night, 1,000 emotions storming behind my eyes. But no tears came. Only one quiet, painful truth settled in my chest. I was alone, and no one was coming to save me. I didn't cry in that hospital bed, not even when they wheeled in another patient next to me or when Kelsey had to explain that my surgery involved metal screws I'd have for life. I just waited. Waited for my parents to change their minds. Waited for a miracle. But they never came. Not that day, not the next. What I did get, though, were updates from social media, photos from Savannah's college orientation, her posing in front of the Duke University welcome sign with a perfectly curated smile, her new dorm with string lights and motivational quotes on the wall, her wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Next stop, greatness." The caption below read, "So proud of our girl, go get 'em, Savannah." I stared at that post from my hospital bed, with my leg in traction and an IV in my arm. There was no post about me, no pray for Avery, no hospital wristband selfie, no update about the injury. It was as if I didn't exist that weekend. Like Savannah's milestone had completely eclipsed my accident. But this wasn't new. This had always been the way things were in my family. Savannah was the sun, and I was just one of the satellites spinning quietly in her orbit. She was the golden child, straight A's since kindergarten, pageant crowns lining her bedroom shelves, the girl who got a brand new car at 16 just for making the honor roll. Meanwhile, I got a used pair of sneakers for winning regionals. Not that I did it for praise, but sometimes it would have been nice to get a "we're proud of you" without it being tied to Savannah's achievements. It wasn't that I hated her. I didn't. If anything, I admired her. She had this magnetic energy that made people lean in. Teachers adored her. My parents worshipped her. Even my classmates followed her like she was royalty. But admiration and invisibility are a dangerous mix. It makes you question your worth. I remember this one night when we were younger. Savannah had gotten accepted into a gifted summer program, and the entire family went out to celebrate. We sat at a steakhouse, and I quietly mentioned that I had won an art contest at school. My dad didn't even look up from the menu. My mom smiled distractedly and said, "That's sweet, honey," before asking Savannah if she wanted the filet or the ribeye. I had drawn for 3 weeks straight for that contest, but it didn't matter. Not really. After I left the hospital, I didn't go home. My parents arranged for me to stay with Mrs. Dubois, our elderly neighbor. She lived 2 houses down and had been a family friend for years. Apparently, my parents couldn't take time off work and had their hands full with Savannah's move-in, so they dropped off a bag of clothes, some toiletries, and a pre-signed insurance form. No hugs, no tearful apologies, just logistics. Mrs. Dubois was kind. She brewed tea every morning and helped me to the bathroom when I couldn't balance on crutches. She told me about her late husband who lost a leg in the war and how he taught himself to walk again out of sheer will. "Pain makes you sharper," she said one day, "but only if you let it." I listened, nodded, smiled politely. But inside I was spiraling, not from the injury, from the clarity. It had taken a broken leg for me to finally see what had always been true. In my family, I was not the priority. I was the strong one, the one they assumed could handle herself, the one they left behind because she always managed. But just because someone can survive the fall doesn't mean they should have had to fall alone. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep holding it all together. Mrs. Dubois wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to be a lifeline. She was 72, widowed, and walked with a slight limp from a bad hip surgery the year before. Her house smelled like lavender and old books. Her garden was the pride of the neighborhood, and she wore matching knit cardigans and pearls even when watering plants. But she became my lifeline anyway. After the hospital discharged me, she greeted me at her front door like I was some long-lost relative, not the abandoned daughter of her flaky neighbors. I stood on crutches, awkward, embarrassed, and still numb from pain meds. She didn't ask questions, just held the door open and said, "You'll stay in the sunroom. It's warm in the mornings and easy to reach from the bathroom." I blinked at her almost in disbelief. She was more prepared for me than my parents had been at any point in my life. The sunroom had a fold-out bed, a basket full of magazines, a stack of crossword puzzles, and a small potted plant on the windowsill labeled Avery's Orchid. She'd even left a bell on the side table in case I needed help during the night. "I'm not helpless," I said softly. She just smiled. "Good. But even strong people deserve help." That sentence hit me harder than the injury. Every morning, Mrs. Dubois brewed a pot of black tea, fixed scrambled eggs and toast, and placed the tray on my lap with a cloth napkin. She sat with me and read aloud from her favorite mystery novels. At night, she rubbed eucalyptus balm on my swollen knee and told me stories about her husband, how he once carried her 3 miles home during a blizzard after she slipped on ice. "He always said pain was a teacher, not a punishment," she said one evening as I winced, trying to adjust my brace. "Learn what it's teaching you and you'll come out stronger." Sometimes I wanted to cry. Not from the physical pain, but because someone I barely knew seemed to care more than the people who raised me. My parents only called twice that first week. Once to confirm that Mrs. Dubois had picked me up, and the second time to ask if I needed anything. When I said no, they responded, "See, we knew you'd be fine." I wasn't fine. I was lonely. I was angry. I was exhausted mentally, physically, spiritually. Every time I struggled to shower to sit to sleep, I remembered the moment my mom said, "You've always been strong," as if strength was some kind of excuse to abandon me. Savannah texted once, just a photo of her new campus sweatshirt with the message, "Can't believe we're in college already." Crazy, right? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, wondering what I could possibly say. "I'm in a sunroom on painkillers while you take selfies in dorm rooms our parents helped decorate." Yeah, no. I turned off my phone and buried it under a pillow. So I started journaling. Every moment I felt ignored, I wrote it down. Every ache, every day I couldn't bend my leg, every cup of tea Mrs. Dubois brewed for me, I documented it all. It was the only way I knew how to process the growing canyon between me and the people I used to call home. And through it all, Mrs. Dubois never treated me like a burden. She didn't smother me or pity me, she just showed up, quietly, consistently. And somewhere between her crossword puzzles and eucalyptus balm, I realized something painful but freeing. Sometimes the people who show up for you the most aren't family by blood. It's strange how quiet can hurt more than noise. At Mrs. Dubois' house, the days blended into each other, soft, slow, and painfully still. No slamming doors, no bickering, no background TV buzzing with sitcoms, just the steady tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant hum of lawnmowers from neighbors I hadn't seen in years. At first, the peace felt like a gift. After all, I'd been running literally for most of my life. Morning workouts classes, team meets, evening practices. Silence was foreign, but soon it turned from comforting to suffocating. There were no footsteps coming down the hallway to check on me, no familiar voices, no mom asking if I wanted more tea, no dad popping in to say he'd picked up my favorite granola bars, no Savannah laughing in the kitchen about something I didn't understand, just empty. Just me. It was in that emptiness I realized something: they weren't coming back, not really. Sure, I got a few text messages here and there. My mom sent a heart emoji once after I said my physical therapy sessions had started. My dad forwarded me a meme he clearly didn't understand. Savannah posted a photo from a campus party captioned "Rushing, no one called." No one asked how therapy was going. No one asked how I was feeling. I was healing, yes, but entirely alone. And it wasn't just physical. One afternoon, I got up early and tried to make myself breakfast. Just toast. Easy. Except I couldn't balance properly on one crutch, and the knife slipped while I was trying to butter the bread. I dropped the whole plate. It shattered. I fell onto the kitchen floor, not hard, just enough to remind me how vulnerable I still was. Mrs. Dubois rushed in, helped me up, didn't say a word. She cleaned the glass and made me another breakfast. Then she sat beside me and said softly, "You don't always have to do it all alone, you know." I didn't answer her. I didn't know how. Because I did have to. I had learned that the hard way. Back at home, I knew what would have happened. My mom would have sighed, annoyed by the mess. My dad would have lectured me about being more careful. Savannah would have laughed and snapped a photo for Snapchat. But no one was here now. Just me. Just this stranger-turned-savior who treated me better than my own family ever had in moments like that. Sometimes I caught myself daydreaming that this was my real home, that Mrs. Dubois was my grandmother, and I was just visiting during recovery. But then the ache would return. Not in my leg, in my chest. Because even fantasies have expiration dates. I kept a running note on my phone titled, "Things They Don't Know." It had entries like, how many steps I can take before the pain kicks in. How it feels to wake up in pain and pretend I'm fine. That I'm scared I'll never run again. That I miss them even when I'm angry. The truth was, I wasn't angry all the time. I was hurt. And what hurt more than anything wasn't the voicemail or the silence, or even being left at Mrs. Dubois's house. What hurt the most was knowing this wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. I was always the afterthought, and deep down a small part of me feared I always would be. The acceptance letter came on a Wednesday afternoon. It was from Georgia State University, nothing flashy, nothing Ivy League, but it had a strong kinesiology program and was only a short drive from Mrs. Dubois's house. The moment I opened it, something inside me stirred. Not excitement, exactly. Not even relief, just clarity. I hadn't told my parents I applied there. Everyone assumed I would follow in Savannah's footsteps. She'd gotten into Duke on an academic scholarship, and for years my mom hinted, no, push the idea that I could maybe transfer there later once I caught up, once I proved myself. But I didn't want to catch up. I didn't want to live in Savannah's shadow anymore. I wanted to stand on my own, even if that meant standing on crutches. When I told my mom about the acceptance, she didn't even try to hide her disappointment. "That's sweet, honey," she said. "But wouldn't it be smarter to aim higher, or at least transfer to Duke once you get settled?" She didn't ask what I wanted to study. She didn't ask why I chose Georgia State. She didn't ask anything, really. She just assumed it was a placeholder until I re-entered their version of the plan. I wanted to scream. To ask her why my choices always needed to align with Savannah's. Why I couldn't just exist as me, not as the one who's not Savannah, not as the strong one, just Avery. But I didn't scream. Instead, I smiled into the phone and said, "Actually, I already declined the offer from Duke." There was a long pause. I'm going to Georgia State. I've already accepted the scholarship." She didn't argue. She just sighed. "Well, you've always done things your own way." Translation. You've always disappointed us. That was the last real conversation I had with either of my parents that summer. I used what little savings I had to put down the housing deposit Mrs. Dubois helped me fill out forms for on-campus disability accommodations. My therapist, yes, she'd gotten me one when insurance refused, wrote a glowing recommendation letter for a campus support program. I was building a life quietly, deliberately, one application and ice pack at a time. It wasn't the kind of move that earned fireworks or Instagram congratulations. Savannah's feed was full of pastel crop tops and sorority smiles. Mine had a photo of my walking boot on a dorm mattress captioned, "New semester, same bones, different path." No one liked it. No hearts. No comments. Not even a pity emoji from my dad. And honestly, that stung. But it also solidified something in me. I was done begging to be seen. College wasn't going to be glamorous. My dorm smelled like ramen and old laundry. I shared it with 3 girls I barely knew. I worked nights at a smoothie bar, went to physical therapy in the mornings, and studied between heating pad rotations. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from the comparisons, free from the expectations, free from the idea that my value was tied to how closely I could follow in someone else's footsteps. I was limping, sure, but I was moving forward, on my own, and it was enough. There's a kind of silence that's louder than screaming, not the peaceful kind like the hush of a library or the quiet before a sunrise. This was the sharp, echoing kind, the kind that followed me everywhere. To class, to work, to therapy. It clung to me like static. My phone didn't buzz with family group chats or late-night check-ins. No one asked how the dorm was. No one sent care packages or cheesy e-cards. There were no missed calls, no voicemails saying they missed me. Just nothing. At first I told myself they were busy, that Savannah's college experience was just more demanding, that my parents had always given us space to grow. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. They'd hovered over Savannah like she was made of glass. Me, I was made of steel, or at least that's how they treated me. They figured if I survived a broken femur alone, I could survive anything. And maybe I could. But that didn't mean I wanted to. That didn't mean it didn't hurt. The worst part wasn't the physical recovery, it was walking across campus surrounded by thousands of students and feeling like I didn't exist to the people who were supposed to know me best. Even when I made the dean's list that first semester, something Savannah had bragged about endlessly in high school, I hesitated to tell anyone. But I did. I texted the family group chat. Just made dean's list first semester. I watched the little delivered icon appear under the message. No one responded. 2 days later, my mom posted a photo of Savannah at a Duke game wearing face paint and cheering in the front row. Our girl full of spirit. I stared at the post longer than I'd like to admit, not because I wanted their attention anymore, but because I finally accepted they weren't capable of giving it. They didn't see me. They never really had. And maybe the most painful part was realizing that even if I succeeded, even if I did everything right, healed, studied, excelled, built a future, they might still never show up. Not out of spite, not because they hated me, but because they'd already decided who I was, the independent one, the backup act, the girl who didn't need praise to keep going. So I stopped trying to prove anything to them. Instead, I started showing up for myself. I printed out my dean's list letter and pinned it above my desk. I took my therapist's advice and wrote down small victories every day, no matter how minor, woke up without pain. didn't need help getting groceries, resisted texting mom just to feel something. Those entries became my proof, my validation. Mrs. Dubois still called every Sunday. She'd ask about my studies, my therapy, my job. She never pressured, never guilted, just listened. Sometimes that 30-minute call felt like a lifeline. It reminded me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to check in. Sometimes it's the ones who stay, even when there's no obligation to. One night after a long shift at the smoothie bar, I stood in my dorm bathroom looking at my reflection in the mirror. The girl staring back at me looked tired but solid. Not bitter, not broken, just awake. I whispered to her, "You're doing okay," and I meant it. I wasn't waiting for their applause anymore. Their silence didn't define me. It just confirmed what I already knew. Some people don't see your worth until someone else points it out, and by then I planned to be so far ahead, they'd need binoculars just to catch a glimpse. Some people chase the spotlight, others learn to live in its shadow. Me, I finally turned it off. It happened one afternoon during winter break. I was back at Mrs. Dubois's house for a few weeks, helping her decorate for the holidays. The living room smelled like cinnamon sticks and pine, and she insisted I help hang ornaments, even though she knew I still limped a little. "Recovery doesn't mean retreat," she told me. "Don't start hiding from life now." While we untangled a string of lights, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Hope you're resting up. Savannah's semester went great, thinking maybe you could apply for transfer to Duke next fall would make things easier for the family." There it was again, that subtle push, that undertone of, you'd be more valuable if you followed her. It didn't matter that I'd made Dean's List again, or that I'd just completed an independent research paper in kinesiology that my professor said was graduate-level work. It didn't matter that I had a job paid my rent and was handling recovery like a damn soldier. What mattered to them was that I still wasn't Savannah. I stared at the message for a while. Then, instead of replying, I opened the Duke admissions portal just to look. I hovered over the transfer application link, and then I closed it. Not out of rebellion, but because I finally understood I wasn't missing out by not becoming her. They were missing out by never seeing me. That was the day I decided I wasn't going to let their definition of success decide my direction. That day, I turned down more than Duke. I turned down the need to be noticed by them. A few weeks later, I was back on campus. The air was crisp, the new semester buzzing with students complaining about classes and credit loads. I didn't say much. I kept my head down, wore my brace under my jeans, and stayed focused. But something had shifted. Instead of watching Savannah's posts with bitterness, I stopped checking altogether. Instead of hoping my parents would reach out, I muted our family chat. I spent my time in labs in the physical therapy center in the back of lecture halls with a thermos of cheap coffee and a notebook full of goals. That's when my professor, Dr. Renner, pulled me aside after class one day. "I read your recovery logs," she said. "The way you documented your healing process? It's powerful, personal. If you're interested, there's a research grant opening up this summer focused on patient-led rehabilitation frameworks. You'd be perfect." I almost laughed, not because I didn't believe her, but because everything they overlooked in me had finally become exactly what someone else saw value in. I applied that night, wrote the whole proposal in one sitting, fueled by years of silence and a need to turn pain into purpose. A few weeks later, I got the call I'd been awarded the grant. It came with a stipend, campus housing, and the opportunity to present at a regional conference. When I called Mrs. Dubois to tell her, she cried. My parents, I didn't bother telling them, not because I was trying to be petty, but because I didn't need their praise anymore. That moment in the quiet of my dorm room, surrounded by open textbooks and medical charts and a half-eaten protein bar, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not the performative kind, the Instagram-filtered caption-ready version my sister lived for, but the kind that runs deep, the kind that doesn't need applause to echo, the kind that says you did this, on your own, without them. My dorm smelled like old socks, microwave ramen, and something vaguely chemical that none of us could trace. The carpet was stained in suspicious places, and the window wouldn't close all the way, which meant winter crept in through the edges, biting at my ankles, while I studied at my desk. But it was mine. It wasn't polished. It wasn't Instagram-worthy. It didn't come with fresh sheets from Bed Bath & Beyond or fairy lights. My mom hung while my sister posed for selfies. It didn't come with a proud family photo in front of the dorm entrance. It came with secondhand everything and silence, but it also came with freedom and a door I could close behind me. Every morning I woke up before sunrise. The pain in my leg wasn't gone, not really, but it had dulled into something manageable, something that lived with me instead of inside me. I'd stretch on the floor next to my bed, brace my knee, and head to physical therapy on campus. The clinic wasn't fancy, but the therapists were kind and tough in equal parts. They pushed me harder than I pushed myself. "You're strong," they kept telling me, but I was tired of being told that. What I wanted to hear was, "You've been through enough." After therapy, I'd grab a smoothie on my way to class. Not as a customer, I worked at the campus smoothie bar, blending protein drinks and acai bowls in between lectures. I learned to memorize regulars' orders, fake smiles for tired students, and ignore the aching pulse in my thigh as I stood for hours behind the counter. No one at work knew what had happened. They didn't ask about the limp, and I didn't offer it. It was easier that way. The rest of the day was a rotation of classes, labs, and late-night study groups. I took notes on anatomy while heating up rice packs in the microwave, iced my leg while writing essays on mobility patterns, and scrawled flashcards with one hand while the other gripped the edge of my desk to stay upright. It wasn't glamorous, but every late night, every early morning, every limp across campus made me stronger. I stopped waiting for people to notice. I stopped checking for their names in my notifications. I stopped explaining my path like it needed permission. I started building. I built routine, structure, stability. I built new relationships, quiet, meaningful ones with classmates who respected my work ethic more than my backstory. I built muscle where bone had broken. I built resilience in the absence of applause. One night, while walking back from the lab, I passed a group of girls huddled in their dorm hallway, FaceTiming their families. I could hear someone's dad saying, "We're proud of you, sweetheart." Another mom shouting through the phone, "You got this, baby." I paused for a second, listening. Then I kept walking. I wasn't jealous anymore. Not really. Because those calls, those words, they meant something when they came from the right people. And I'd learned the hard way that if it doesn't come freely, it's not worth begging for. Later that week, I updated the notes app I'd started months ago, the one titled Things They Don't Know. I added a new line, that I made it through midterms on a busted leg, 4 hours of sleep, and no encouragement from home, and still passed every class. That list was growing longer, but so was I. And slowly, the silence became less of a void and more of a boundary. Not something that kept people out, but something that protected what I was building. A life. My life, built with grit, bruised knees, protein bars, and quiet victories. It didn't smell like success. It smelled like ramen. And for the first time, I was okay with that. It started as an assignment, a mid-semester project for my kinesiology class. Explore a real-world recovery case, preferably one with personal meaning. Most students interviewed athletes, patients, or professors. I didn't need to. I already had a case. Me. At first, I didn't want to go there. Not that deep, not that raw. But when I sat down to brainstorm, my fingers hovered over the keyboard frozen. I realized there was no other story I could tell truthfully, not with the same weight. So I started typing. I pulled out my old journals, the ones I filled during the worst days, the pain logs, the notes app entries, the scribbled thoughts I'd written in the dark on bad nights when I couldn't sleep or stretch or feel anything but hollow. I turned those fragments into paragraphs. The swelling and the stiffness became data points. The missed calls became context. The bruises became benchmarks. What began as a case study quickly became something else, a narrative laced with science recovery metrics and something rarer honesty. I titled it When the Safety Net Isn't There. Navigating Injury Recovery Without a Support System. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The emotion was enough. When I submitted it, I assumed it would get lost among more polished clinical reports. But 2 weeks later, Dr. Renner called me into her office. She had printed my paper, annotated it in red ink, but not with corrections. With praise. "Avery," she said, adjusting her glasses. This is one of the most compelling undergrad submissions I've read in years. I sat frozen. You didn't just analyze the physical, you revealed the psychological, the emotional. You wrote your way out and you made recovery human again. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. Then she said something I'll never forget. I want to nominate you for the National Undergraduate Research Award, and I want you to present this paper in person. My throat tightened. Me at a conference, you have a voice, she said, and it's time people heard it. It took everything in me not to cry in that office, because for the first time someone wasn't telling me I was strong just to dismiss me. She was telling me I was strong because I had turned something painful into something that could help others. I called Mrs. Dubois that night. She cried, of course. Then she said, "You're not just healing, sweetheart. You're leading." Savannah didn't know. My parents didn't know. I didn't post about it. I didn't need to. I practiced my presentation for weeks, speaking to the mirror in my dorm, sometimes with a heating pad wrapped around my leg, sometimes between shifts at the smoothie bar. I memorized data points, refined my phrasing, and built a slideshow that showed progress not just medically, but emotionally. When I finally stood on that stage in Chicago under harsh lights in a room full of academics, I wasn't afraid. Because this time I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't begging to be noticed. I was simply sharing truth. When I finished, there was a pause, then applause, real thunderous applause, not polite claps. I saw a professor in the front row wiping her eyes. Afterward, a woman in a wheelchair approached me and said, "I wish I had someone like you in my recovery. You made me feel seen." And that was the moment. Not the conference badge, not the award. That moment. Because that's when I knew I hadn't just written my way out. I had written my way forward, and I wasn't done yet. After the conference in Chicago, something changed. Not just on the outside, although that happened too. I got emails from professors I'd never met. A rehabilitation nonprofit reached out asking if I'd consider turning my research into a community pilot program. A grad student from NYU asked for permission to cite me in her thesis. But the real shift was internal. For so long, I had been moving through life like I was trying to survive a disaster no one else saw. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was designing something, not just escaping it. My pain wasn't just something I endured. It had become something I understood, something I could use. I started mapping out ideas in my notebooks, ways to make physical therapy more accessible, especially for low-income communities. I remembered what it felt like when insurance wouldn't cover my in-home sessions, and Mrs. Dubois had to pay out of pocket for a freelance therapist. How I'd had to rig my own schedule and tools to keep progressing. That shouldn't have to happen. If I was ever going to change something, I knew it had to start with that feeling of being left behind, of not having options. I drafted a plan for a mobile rehab unit, a physical therapy van outfitted like a clinic traveling to underserved neighborhoods, bringing recovery resources to people who couldn't afford to travel or take time off work. It was a crazy idea, scrappy, expensive, and logistically complicated, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. By the end of the semester, 2 classmates had joined me. One was a med student interested in sports injury prevention. The other, a design major who specialized in modular builds. We didn't have funding yet, but we had blueprints, case studies, and passion. It was messy. We held our planning meetings in the back of the library over instant noodles and off-brand trail mix. We pitched the idea to anyone who would listen, professors, local clinics, even a small grant committee on campus. Most people smiled politely. Some laughed, but a few, just a few, listened. Really listened. And that was enough to keep us going. Meanwhile, back home, the silence continued. My mom hadn't called since winter. My dad occasionally sent me news articles he thought were interesting, none of which related to me. Savannah's posts had started changing. The cheerful sorority updates had turned into vague captions like, "Learning who's really in your corner." Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who watch you drown. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't ask. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I used to be. That sharp, bitter fire had burned down to something quieter but hotter. It wasn't rage. It was drive. I was still working nights at the smoothie bar, still icing my leg when it throbbed, still studying late under flickering fluorescent lights. But everything had more meaning now. I wasn't hustling for approval. I wasn't grinding to be seen. I was building something that mattered, and no one could take credit for it but me. One night, while reorganizing my binders, I found a photo Mrs. Dubois had printed and tucked into my textbook. It was from the conference, me on stage, mid-sentence, arms moving like I had something worth saying. The caption she wrote in block letters below read, "Purpose doesn't shout. It walks." I stared at that photo for a long time, and in that moment, I realized something powerful. I had stopped waiting for permission to matter. I was no longer just the girl with the broken leg. I was Avery Collins, and I was just getting started. It started like any other Monday. I was sitting in the campus library, hunched over a spreadsheet for the mobile clinic proposal, half listening to lo-fi beats through one earbud. My back hurt, my leg was sore, finals were looming, but I felt steady, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then my email pinged. Subject: internship application, Collins Health Outreach Initiative. My heart stopped. Collins wasn't a rare last name, but something about it tugged at me. I clicked. Applicant name: Savannah Collins. At first I assumed it was a mistake, a coincidence. But then I saw the cover letter. As someone who's come to understand the failures of traditional support systems, I'm passionate about making recovery more accessible. I'm seeking not just a position, but a second chance to do something meaningful. I reread it twice, 3 times. There it was. Her name, her tone. Gone were the exclamation points and confident buzzwords. Gone was the air of a girl who expected the door to open just because she knocked. This was someone else. This was my sister. And she had no idea the CEO of the organization she was applying to was me. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. I hadn't spoken to Savannah in almost 2 years. The last time we exchanged more than a birthday text, I was still limping across campus, and she was still bathing in the glow of our parents' approval. I had no idea what had changed. I didn't know if she'd left Duke, if she'd moved home, if she'd fallen apart. I didn't know because she hadn't told me, and yet now she was unknowingly reaching out, not for attention, not for praise, but for purpose. I stared at the screen, torn. There was a version of this story where I hit decline without a second thought, where I protected what I'd built and kept her out of it, where I reminded her, like everyone else had reminded me, what it feels like to be on the outside. But that wasn't who I had become, and if she was applying here of all places, maybe she wasn't who she used to be either. So I scheduled an interview. A week later, she walked into our temporary office space, an old community rec center we were renting after hours, and I barely recognized her. She looked smaller, not physically, but the glow she used to wear like armor was gone. Her hair was tied back simply. No makeup, no curated persona, just Savannah. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I stood at the door to the conference room, letting her sit for a beat. Then I said her name. Savannah. Her head snapped up. She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You're the CEO. I nodded. Founder, too. She looked down at the resume in her lap. Her hands shook slightly. I didn't know. I figured. Silence. Not angry, not tense, just full of everything we hadn't said in years. Finally, she whispered, I should have been there. When you fell. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was a copy of the X-ray of my shattered femur. Taped to it was a note I had written long ago, back when I still needed a reason to keep pushing. Sometimes the worst breaks lead to the strongest foundations. I slid it across the table. She stared at it, nodded, eyes glassy. She didn't ask for the job. She didn't beg. She just sat there and took in the moment, like she understood this wasn't about employment. It was about reckoning. And me, I realized I had all the power I once begged for. And I didn't want revenge. I wanted growth. For her, for me, for both of us. So I said the only thing that mattered. You start Monday. Savannah started work on a Monday. She didn't show up in heels or with perfect hair like I remembered. No glossy tote bag, no designer sunglasses tucked into her collar. Just a plain navy blue polo jeans and a clipboard she held like it was a shield. I had her start at the bottom. Intake. That meant she was the one logging new patients, checking insurance info, and confirming therapy schedules. The kind of grunt work no one notices unless you mess it up. She didn't complain. She nodded when assigned, said, "Yes, ma'am," to the clinical leads, and sat quietly during our weekly staff meetings, scribbling notes while the rest of the team debated protocols and pilot routes. She didn't speak to me much, not out of coldness, more like deference. As if she wasn't sure which version of me she was supposed to talk to, the girl she ignored or the woman she worked for. At first, the team didn't connect the dots. No one knew we were sisters. We had different hair colors now, different last names on our badges. Mine read Avery Collins, founder, and hers just said S. Collins, intake assistant. To them, she was just another new hire. To me, she was a mirror. She didn't glide through the day like she used to. There was hesitation in her movements, humility in her voice. When she was asked to clean the exercise mats or refill supply bins, she did it, quietly, thoroughly. But what struck me the most was her eyes. They were tired, not physically, but spiritually, like someone who finally realized that being adored doesn't mean being understood, that applause doesn't always equal support. During a mobile clinic visit to a rural town outside Macon, we all piled into the van after a 12-hour shift. Everyone was buzzing. Patients had cried with relief. One woman hugged the whole team after standing unassisted for the first time in years. Savannah sat by the window staring at her hands. She hadn't touched a patient directly, but she'd helped manage the flow, kept things organized, made things easier. No one clapped for her. No one said, "Great job, Savannah." She sat in the corner of the van, silent. I recognized that look. It was the same one I used to wear in high school when Savannah came home with a new ribbon, and I had just run my best time, but no one noticed. It was the look of someone watching the party from the outside, of someone realizing they were invisible. That night, back at our shared Airbnb, she hesitated at my door before softly knocking. "Do you need help with the reports?" she asked. I looked up from my laptop. "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." So we sat there side by side on the floor, laptops, open, silence between us. Not uncomfortable, just earned. At one point she spoke without looking at me. "I didn't get into the program I wanted at Duke." I paused. She continued, "Lost my scholarship, fought with my roommate. I moved back home 6 months ago." I nodded slowly. I figured something happened. She let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, life happened." I didn't comfort her. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew that pain didn't need to be fixed. It needed to be sat with, to be recognized. So I handed her the spreadsheet I was working on and said, "Highlight the overdue patient surveys." She got to work. No more spotlight, no more center stage, just a girl in a quiet corner learning what it felt like to show up even when no one was watching. It was the kind of event Savannah used to own. A panel hosted by a national wellness organization, streamed online with lights-branded banners and catered snacks arranged like they were born to be photographed. The topic, innovating recovery voices from the front lines. Avery was the closing speaker. The crowd was full of foundation donors, university reps, media crews, and other startup founders. It was the kind of room that once felt like Savannah's natural habitat places, where she was used to being the girl they all noticed. Except now she wasn't on the stage. She was in the second row, a guest of the founder, her younger sister. She didn't wear heels. She didn't try to be seen. She just sat still, her staff lanyard looped around her neck like armor. When Avery stepped up to the podium, there was no grand introduction, just a modest smile and the words, "When I fractured my femur at 17, I thought I'd lost everything. What I didn't realize was I'd found my purpose." Savannah's chest tightened. She remembered that day. She remembered not calling, not showing up. She remembered the voicemail she hadn't even thought to object to when their mom left it. "It's just bad timing," she'd said at the time. "She'll be fine." But Avery hadn't been fine. She had just made it look that way. As Avery continued speaking, photos flashed on the screen behind her clinic sites in underserved towns, smiling patients, makeshift gym setups in vans, student volunteers kneeling beside seniors as they relearned how to move again. We built Colin's Health Outreach not out of charity, Avery said, but out of necessity. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible while you're in pain, and I want to make sure no one else has to. The room erupted in applause. Real applause, not forced, not polite, the kind that rises out of genuine respect. Savannah clapped too. Slowly at first, then faster because she meant it. Because somewhere deep inside past the jealousy, past the shame, was awe. She looked around. People were smiling, nodding, taking notes. They weren't impressed because Avery had survived. They were inspired because she had transformed. And no one, not one person, mentioned Savannah. There was no, "You must be her sister." No sideways glances. No special seat saved in the front row. For once, she was just part of the background. And surprisingly, she didn't hate it. Later at the reception, she stood by the table of sparkling water bottles and protein bars while Avery took photo after photo with panelists and attendees. People asked her about her research, her mobile unit plans, even invited her to submit proposals to federal funding boards. Savannah just watched. No envy, just quiet understanding. Because for the first time she saw Avery clearly not as the afterthought little sister, not as the girl limping behind, not as the shadow, but as the architect of something that mattered. She remembered all the times she'd been the one in the spotlight with Avery clapping politely from the side, and she thought about how easy it had been to assume that applause meant worth. But now she knew better. It wasn't about being seen, it was about seeing others and showing up. After the event, as they walked side by side toward the parking lot, Avery broke the silence. "You did good today." Savannah blinked. "I didn't do anything." Avery looked at her. "Exactly. No performance, no trying, no spotlight, just presence." And somehow that felt like the biggest win of all. The email came late at night, long after I'd closed my laptop. I was already in bed, nursing a sore knee with a heating pad and reading over field notes from our latest clinic run. My phone buzzed, lighting up the ceiling with a soft glow. I expected it to be a reminder or a question from our intake team, but the subject line read, "Grant Award Notification, National Recovery Innovation Fund." I sat up, heart pounding. My fingers trembled slightly as I tapped the screen. We had applied 2 months ago on a whim, a long shot. The kind of 6-figure grant that changed entire programs, usually given to research universities or organizations with decades of prestige. But the email wasn't a rejection, it was a congratulations. "Your organization has been selected to receive a $500,000 grant to expand your mobile recovery model statewide. We believe in your mission, your innovation, and your story. Let's rebuild recovery together." I blinked. $500,000. Enough to buy more vans, hire staff launch in 6 more cities, and create a sustainable infrastructure. Enough to turn Colin's Health Outreach from a college project into a real legacy. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. The glow from the phone lit up the walls of my tiny apartment like fireworks. The next morning, I called an emergency team meeting. Everyone clapped, hugged, high-fived, cried. Savannah sat near the back, smiling, hands folded neatly in her lap. When our project coordinator passed out sparkling cider in plastic cups, I caught her glance. She looked proud, but something about her eyes told me she wasn't just happy for me, she was bracing for what this meant. Because the offer came with a condition. The fund wanted to feature our origin story in their national campaign. Billboards, commercials, interviews. They wanted the story of a family who overcame. And they wanted both sisters in the spotlight. They didn't know the real story. They didn't know Savannah hadn't shown up when I fell, that she hadn't called, that she didn't see me for years, that this wasn't a heartwarming story of family unity. It was a story of distance, of fracture, of painfully earned selfhood. But they didn't want fracture. They wanted narrative, something clean, something digestible. 2 sisters, 1 vision, a legacy born from struggle. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. That night, I found Savannah restocking therapy bands in the supply room. She looked up as I entered. "They want us both," I said. She paused. "I figured. I haven't said yes." She nodded slowly, not asking for a favor, not begging, just waiting. "I won't rewrite what happened," I said. "Not for a grant, not for anyone." Her voice was quiet. "You don't have to. I don't want that either." We stood there for a moment, two people who used to share a last name and now shared a purpose. "I just want to help," she added. "No credit. No spotlight. If this grows, it should be because you kept walking, not because I caught up." I swallowed the knot in my throat. Savannah wasn't the same girl who once posed in front of dorm rooms while I lay alone in a hospital bed. And maybe I wasn't the girl who needed to prove she could thrive without her family. Maybe we were both something else now, something real. "I'll tell them," I said. "I'll do the campaign alone. The truth's strong enough without an edit." She nodded. "Good." And then she added, "But if they ever ask what kept you going, you can tell them the pain taught you how." But maybe the silence did too. It's strange how clearly you can see the beginning when you're finally standing at the top. The day of the campaign launch felt surreal. A sleek new van wrapped in our nonprofit's colors stood outside a community center in rural Georgia, surrounded by folding chairs, media crews, and families waiting for free consultations. Our logo was printed on a banner that waved proudly in the breeze. It didn't feel real. Until I stepped out of the van and saw a little girl gripping crutches, her foot wrapped in a soft cast, her mom whispering, "They're gonna help fix it, sweetheart." Then it felt real. We weren't just building something anymore. We had built it. And people had started to come, not because we promised a miracle, but because we offered something more rare: presence, patience, understanding. I stood at the podium again this time without nerves. "People often say strength is about pushing through," I told the crowd, "but I think strength is also about being still, sitting in the silence, holding the pain without rushing to cover it. Strength is what you build after everyone else walks away." The applause came soft and steady. No cameras were pointed at Savannah. No one asked about her role, but she was there working the check-in desk with calm efficiency, taping patient charts to clipboards, smiling quietly at the children limping in through the door. She hadn't needed the spotlight to show up, and I no longer needed to stand in it just to prove I belonged. After the event, the little girl with crutches came up to me. She was maybe 8 or 9 with nervous eyes and messy braids. Her mom whispered something to her, and she stepped forward shyly. "My teacher said I should write about someone strong," she said, "and I want to write about you." I crouched so I was eye level with her. "You know what?" I said gently. "That means a lot, but I think you're already writing your own story of strength." She beamed, hugging me around the waist before hobbling back to her mom. I stood up slowly, my leg aching not from injury, but from years of rebuilding. It was a familiar pain now. Not something to run from, just a quiet reminder of where I'd started. Later that night, back in my apartment, I opened the drawer where I kept old things. My first therapy journal, the printed email from the Grant Foundation, a crumpled napkin with one of Mrs. Dubois's handwritten mantras: "Pain is a teacher. Let it guide, not define." At the bottom was the X-ray, the one from my accident, the metal rod still visible, the clean break, and taped to it the same note I once gave to Savannah: "Sometimes the worst breaks lead to the strongest foundations." That line used to feel like hope, a promise I wasn't sure would come true. Now it felt like truth, because everything that had once made me feel weak, the silence, the abandonment, the injury, the erasure, had become my foundation. I had rebuilt on it, stronger, smarter, louder, but not angry, because what I had now wasn't just success, it was peace. Peace built from pain, purpose born from being ignored, and power earned step by slow healing step. I wasn't expecting them to show up. Honestly, I didn't even think they remembered the date. The televised panel had been scheduled for weeks, part of the Foundation's national campaign highlighting young innovators. I was one of 3 guests seated between a pediatric trauma surgeon from Boston and a social worker who'd created a therapy program for foster kids. All of us had turned our pain into something larger than ourselves. That was the theme: legacy through resilience. I'd practiced my talking points. I'd picked out a simple navy blazer. I'd even bought a new pair of shoes, something clean and solid for when the camera zoomed out. But nothing prepared me for the moment I glanced at the studio audience and saw them, my parents, sitting in the second row next to a local councilwoman and a cameraman's tripod. They were dressed like they were attending a graduation. My mom wore the pearl earrings she always saved for important events. My dad was in a pressed blazer I hadn't seen since high school. They clapped politely when I was introduced, smiled even. I froze for a beat, not from anger, not even from sadness, just confusion. Because they hadn't called, hadn't messaged, hadn't RSVP'd. They were just there, suddenly reinserted into a narrative they had long abandoned. The moderator gestured for me to speak. So I did. I told the story I'd refined over the years, about the accident, the silence, the slow climb from fractured to functional. I didn't name names. I didn't blame. I just let the truth do the work. When I fell, I thought someone would catch me, I said, but no one did. And in that space between the impact and the recovery, I found out who I was. The crowd nodded. Some clapped. The camera light blinked red. My parents didn't move. Later, backstage, I stepped into the hallway to catch my breath. The studio air had gone thick and I needed space. I was halfway through a bottled water when I heard footsteps behind me. "Sweetheart." My mother's voice. I turned. They stood there awkwardly, like they weren't sure if they should hug me or shake my hand. "You were amazing," she said quickly. "We had no idea you'd come so far." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "There was a magazine feature, a press release, a scholarship award. None of those caught your attention." My dad tried to smile. "We're here now. That counts, doesn't it?" And that was it. That sentence. We're here now. Like I was supposed to be grateful, like the absence hadn't already taught me everything I needed to know. I took a deep breath. "You weren't there when I screamed in the ER," I said. "You weren't there when I begged the nurse to check if you'd arrived. You weren't there when Mrs. Dubois had to hold my hand through therapy or pay for my in-home care. You weren't there when I got accepted into college or when I defended my capstone or when I launched the clinic." I paused. "You're not here now. You're just watching." My mom blinked, stunned. My dad looked down at the floor. "But we posted about the article," she offered. "We shared the TEDx talk. We told everyone how proud we are of you." That made me laugh. Not a bitter laugh, just a tired one. "You're proud of the headline, not the story." They didn't reply. Eventually, I turned to leave. I had a debrief to attend, a grant call to prepare for, a life to keep building. "Avery," my mom called after me. "Wait, can't we start over?" I looked over my shoulder. "This isn't a movie, Mom. It doesn't rewind." Then I walked away. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood that love isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about recognition of what happened, of what didn't, of who showed up and who didn't. And I wasn't willing to rewrite my truth for applause from the people who ignored the first act. After the panel, I didn't cry. I thought I might. I thought seeing my parents, hearing my mom call me sweetheart, like we hadn't lost years of connection, would bring back the tears I used to bury in journal entries and pillowcases. But nothing came. No pain, no fury, no need to scream, just stillness. It felt like when you walk into an old room and realize it doesn't belong to you anymore. The furniture's still there. The photos still hang. But you're not that person now. You've outgrown the walls. I didn't go home that night. I went back to the clinic. Savannah was still there, sorting through patient files with her usual quiet focus. She looked up when I entered, reading something in my face. "They came, didn't they?" I nodded. She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached into her tote bag and handed me a folded piece of paper. "You should read this," she said. "It came in with the morning mail. I saved it for you." The envelope had no return address, just my name, Avery Collins, written in pencil like someone had second-guessed whether they were brave enough to send it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Miss Avery, I met you at the clinic last month. I'm the woman who had the stroke. You held my hand when I cried because I couldn't lift it yet. You said it'll come back, one nerve at a time. I wanted to tell you, I brushed my hair yesterday, with my own hand. It took 10 minutes, but I did it. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Love, Doris. I read it 3 times. Then again. The air shifted. Because that shaky handwriting, that tiny victory was the applause that mattered. Not the panel, not the camera crew, not my parents sitting in row 2 with their clean blazers and too late smiles. But this woman, this quiet, invisible milestone, brushing her hair, with a hand she was told might never work again, because someone showed up, not just to fix, but to witness. I tucked the letter into my planner and sat down beside Savannah. We didn't speak for a few minutes, just worked. The buzz of the printer filled the room. Eventually, I said, they wanted to start over. Savannah didn't look up. And I told them this isn't a movie. She nodded. Good. Then she said something that stuck. You didn't just survive without them. You became someone they can't even reach anymore. I stared at her. Not out of shock, but out of recognition. Because she was right. I used to crave their validation like oxygen. But now I breathed fine without it. We spent the rest of the night prepping for the new pilot launch. Our first interstate expansion was set for next month, and the logistics were a nightmare. Permits, vans, equipment, liability, paperwork. It was chaotic and exhausting and beautiful, because every task had a face behind it. Every form meant a patient. Every late night meant someone would get care they'd never dreamed was possible. Before I left, I updated the whiteboard in the break room. At the top, I scribbled, Win of the Week. Then underneath it, I wrote, Doris brushed her hair. Her way, her pace. The next morning, someone added, Tony walked 12 steps without falling. Then Maria bent her elbow for the first time since surgery. By noon, the board was full. There were no likes, no shares, no retweets, just silent applause from a community that didn't need perfection, just presence. I smiled and stepped into the clinic van, my clipboard tucked under one arm, and waved at Savannah as she loaded crutches into the back. This was our life now, not a redemption arc, not a revenge fantasy, just real work. And in the quiet between patients and paperwork, I realized something powerful. I wasn't chasing love anymore. I was giving it. We were packing up after a long day at the clinic site in a small coastal town, one of our newest locations where we'd set up in a decommissioned library. Folding chairs scraped the tile floors, the scent of antiseptic still clung to the air, and the sunlight outside had turned gold with evening. Savannah was wiping down therapy bands near the window when she spoke. Can I ask you something? I looked up from the supply cart. Of course. She hesitated. Why did you hire me? I blinked. You applied. I know, she said quickly, but you didn't have to accept me. You had every reason not to. Every right. I paused. She set down the band she was holding and turned to face me, fully arms crossed like she was bracing herself for something heavier than rejection. I wasn't there for you. And not just at the hospital. For years, I didn't show up. I didn't even understand what you were going through. I didn't ask. I didn't care enough to ask. And I was your sister. Her voice cracked a little. So, why let me in? I looked at her. Not the version I'd grown up envying, the golden girl in Instagram filters and orientation pics, but this version. Tired. Honest. Standing in a room we'd built together, one quiet task at a time. Because I wanted to see who you'd become when no one gave you a shortcut, I said. Her eyes widened. You always had a stage, Savannah. Always had applause. But I wanted to see who you'd be without it, if you'd still show up, if you'd work, if you'd stay. I stepped closer. And you did. She blinked fast, swallowing something that threatened to surface. I wasn't finished. When I got your application, I didn't feel angry. I didn't want to punish you. I saw a choice. Not for you, for me. I could have let my past control my present. I could have taken the win and shut the door, but I didn't build this place to prove anyone wrong. I built it to give people the thing I didn't get a second chance. I let the silence land, then added softly, that includes you. Savannah sat down on the edge of the equipment crate. You know, I used to think strength was being chosen, being praised, being liked. But now, I think maybe it's just getting up when no one claps. She looked up at me, eyes glossy but steady. I wasn't strong back then. You are now, I said. We finished cleaning in silence after that, the unspoken things no longer quite so heavy. As we locked the doors behind us, Savannah stopped just outside the van. Do you forgive me? I took a breath. I did. A long time ago. She looked surprised. You never said. I didn't need to. I shrugged gently. Forgiveness isn't something you always announce. Sometimes you just live it. She nodded slowly, and for the first time I saw the guilt leave her shoulders like fog burned away by sun. Thank you, she said. I smiled. You earned it. We drove in silence after that, but it was different now. Not tense, not heavy. Just quiet in the way old wounds are once they've finally scarred over. At a red light, she turned to me one more time. I want to stay, she said. Not just for the job, for this, all of it. I know, I said, and I did. Because the truth was she had stayed even when it was hard, even when it meant being invisible, even when it meant watching someone else get the applause she used to crave. That was strength, and it was real. The grant announcement went live on a rainy Thursday. I was at the clinic reviewing quarterly impact numbers when my inbox lit up with a press release from the National Recovery Innovation Fund. It had the usual formal headline, New Funding Powers Expansion of Rural Therapy Access. But what caught my breath was the subhead, led by founder Avery Collins. Collins' health outreach brings healing home. No mention of where I started, no recycled trauma headlines, just the work, the name, the mission. It didn't need to be about the fall anymore. Now it was about the climb. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to clear my head. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still glistened, catching the sun like a quiet kind of celebration. I walked the long path behind the building where we kept a tiny reflection garden, just a few benches, some flowers and a plaque with a quote from Mrs. Dubois who passed last year, "Kindness is what we do when no one's looking. That's when it matters most." I sat there a while, breathing in the scent of damp soil and wild mint, thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who begged for love with perfect grades and swallowed grief with silence. She was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone forged in that silence, someone who turned neglect into knowledge, absence into architecture. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. For the first time in over a year, I typed my parents' number into the screen. Not to reach out, not for closure, just to delete it. No bitterness, no drama, just space, clearing out what no longer served me so I could make room for what did. A minute later, I got a text from Savannah. Tony just climbed the van steps without help. Took 5 minutes. I cried. I smiled. That's what we did now. We cried not for what we lost, but for what people dared to reclaim. And I realized something in that moment. I hadn't come full circle. I'd gone forward. Far beyond where the circle ended. 2 months after the grant went public, I stood in front of our new central office, a renovated post office in a small Georgia town we'd once served with folding chairs and pop-up tents. Now it had a real front desk, labeled therapy rooms, even a break room with a working coffee maker and a shelf full of thank you cards from patients across the state. On the wall in the lobby, our mission was printed in bold letters, "We don't just treat pain. We meet it where it lives." That line had come from a team brainstorming session. Savannah had written it on a sticky note and quietly passed it to me under the table. Now it was the first thing every visitor saw. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but meaningful. No press, no podiums, just our staff, some patients, and a few local partners. We didn't need cameras, we had progress. After the crowd filtered out, I stayed behind, wandering the halls. In one room, a former stroke patient was showing a new intern how to adjust an arm splint. He'd come full circle and now volunteered weekly. In another, Savannah stood beside a new intake trainee, walking her through the client software step by step. She didn't rush. She didn't dominate. She taught with quiet clarity, just like she had learned. She caught my eye through the glass and smiled. I nodded, pride swelling deep and steady. Later, back in my office, I pulled out the original folder, my journal, Doris's letter, the x-ray of my leg, and slipped them into a fireproof archive box. They were still part of me, but they no longer needed to sit on the surface. My pain had been the blueprint. But this living, breathing network of healing was the house I built. And now it was time to share the keys. I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began outlining our leadership development program. It would mentor young professionals from underserved communities, teach them the model, fund their own mobile units. I didn't want the story to end with me. I wanted it to expand, because the greatest revenge was not success. It was multiplication. The last thing I packed into the mobile unit that morning wasn't equipment or paperwork. It was a framed note. I placed it near the check-in window, just high enough for patients to see while waiting, but not too obvious. Simple black frame, white paper, my handwriting untouched since the day I wrote it for Savannah. Sometimes the worst breaks lead to the strongest foundations. That sentence had carried me through silence, abandonment, recovery, and growth. It wasn't just about my leg anymore. It was about identity, about rebuilding yourself when no one else shows up, about choosing who you want to become even when the people who raised you can't recognize who you are anymore. I didn't need applause from them. I had something better. Every letter from patients who could walk again. Every smile from a kid who finally got treatment. Every intern who told me I didn't think someone like me could do this work until I met you. Those were my legacy. So here's the truth. We don't always get the love we deserve from the people we expect, but that doesn't mean we're unworthy. It just means we were meant to build something new. And maybe build it for someone else who's still waiting to be seen. That's the message I left behind. For the next girl sitting in a hospital bed alone. For the boy whose pain is dismissed because his strength is assumed. For anyone who's ever been overlooked, silenced, forgotten. You are not weak. You are unfinished. And what you choose to build from that pain, that will become your power. If you've ever felt left behind, ignored, or invisible, know this: your story isn't over. It's just waiting for you to write the next chapter. Follow the journey, share the message, build your foundation, because the strongest legacies aren't handed down. They're built step by step, with or without applause.